Hey everyone, it's Priscilla from Stitch Queen Crochet, and today, let's fix your crochet tension. I have 8 tips for you today, and I'll have timestamps in the description of them all linked out, but make sure you at least stay until tip number 4, but they're all helpful. Anyway, let's get right into the video. Alright, let's get to tip number 1 because you've probably heard it before, and we're going to go ahead and get it out the way. Practice, practice, practice. In case you don't know who I am, I've been crocheting for about 15 years now, making patterns, dealing with different gauge swatches, learning what my tension is. And crochet is basically a bunch of muscle memory. The more you practice your crochet muscle, the more consistent it will get over time. Whether you crochet tight or loose, every crocheter is different. I just tend to crochet a little bit more looser. So when people say to practice, they mean it. Your tension will start to get more and more consistent the more you practice. And if you want to know how I crochet this fast, I made a whole video about it. I know you're going to ask. I'll link that below as well. One good way to practice is make a bunch of dishcloths. I can't say that word right. This is not a dishcloth, it's an example, but make a bunch of squares using different stitches. Practice that way because no one cares how dishcloths look. Make a bunch of those and practice your tension that way. Okay, so for tip number 2, we're going to talk about how holding your yarn can also affect your tension. So for example, I hold my yarn like this, over my 3 fingers in my left hand, I'm right-handed, and over my pointer finger like this. And I use my fingers down here to hold the tension, so I can kind of do it as loose or as tight as I need to do it for that stitch. Now, a lot of people sometimes have their tension way too tight. They'll like wrap it a bunch of times and have it over their finger, and then it might be harder to pull when they're crocheting. Also, you might have it too loose. You might have it just like this. You're crocheting and your yarn is like super loose. So I would say play around with different types of ways to hold your yarn to kind of make your tension tighter or looser. And feel free to look up other crocheters too and look at how they hold their yarn, get some ideas, and try something for a while, see if it works. If not, try something different. A lot of different ways to hold it, but I would say find out what works. But if your tension is always too tight because your yarn's always too tight, sometimes it can be pulling out of your skein or ball of yarn very tight. Sometimes like doing like outside pull or center pull might be like way too tight. So if you need to, pull out a bunch of yarn, you know what I mean? Give yourself some looseness and then try wrapping around your finger so it's not too tight being pulled from your skein, ball, or cake of yarn. If that makes sense. Just pull out a bunch, you have looser tension, and then wrap it around your finger, and you're not having to worry about the yarn being pulled too tight from your skein of yarn. All right, tip number 3. How you hold your hook can also sometimes affect it as well. Well, there's 2 ways to hold your hook. You can hold it like this or like this. And honestly, it doesn't matter which way you hold your hook, but sometimes holding it far away from your work or holding it close to your work can make a difference depending on how you hold your hook. I hold mine like this. So I would say play around with being closer or further away and see if that affects your tension on your crochet. All right, tip number 4 is a game changer. I kind of call it like the pull-up loop. I'm not sure if there's an actual name for it, but basically this pull-up loop is what will help your stitches be taller and also tighter or looser, you'll see. So the pull-up loop is the first loop that you pull through in your stitch. So for example, we're going to use double crochet to kind of show you the difference. We're going to do a long pull-up loop and then a short one so you can see the difference of the stitch height. Okay, so for double crochet, I yarn over, I put it into my stitch. Now here is the pull-up loop part. For every stitch, you're going to end up pulling through a loop. So I yarn over and I pull up a loop. This loop, I can do it very tight. I can pull my yarn, do it tight, or I can loosen it up and do it very loose. We're going to do it very loose to see the difference of the stitch height. So I'm going to pull up my loop very loose, and I do the stitch normally after that. Let's do it again. Yarn over, I'm going to put it into my stitch, and the yarn that I pull up when I first put into my stitch is that pull up loop. I'm going to do it very loosely, and then do my stitch normally after that. I'm going to do that a few times so we can compare it to not pulling it up that high. But this loop really controls how loose or how tight your stitch will be. So, as you can see, I pulled up very high and I got a very high stitch, especially even compared to my last row. So we're going to do the next few stitches with a shorter or more tighter pull-up loop. So I'm going to yarn over and go into my next stitch. Then I'm going to yarn over and pull up loop. I'm going to keep it tight like this, close to my stitch. Then I'm going to do the rest of the stitch normally. Do that again. For next, I'm going to yarn over, pull it through, keep it small, keep that pull up loop very small, and I'm going to continue crocheting the stitch. Yarn over, put it through, yarn over, pull it through, keep it tight and small. I'm not pulling it up high, I'm keeping it small. And then let's do it in my last one, keeping it very tight. As you can see, after I do this last stitch correctly, the difference in the height of these stitches and how small these ones are. And that, oh, I guess I messed that one up. That is the power of that pull-up loop. See how big these are compared to how small? Even the row starts to kind of cascade down a little bit, as you can see. So pulling up that first loop very loosely or tightly will help you change the tightness or the looseness of your stitch. So if you are crocheting very, very tight, pull up that first loop a little bit more. If you're crocheting too loose, try to have your stitch, that first pull up loop, very small. So if you're dealing with like a gauge swatch, you need your rows to be taller. Like, you know, like if you don't know about gauge, that's a whole nother video. I'll probably link it below. You need a 4x4 usually inch square, and sometimes your rows are too short, you know, so you don't reach that 4" with the amount of rows that you want. So you can do a bigger pull-up loop. Or if your square is too big compared to their example, you can use a shorter pull-up loop when you crochet, and that will help the stitch be smaller. You can also do this by changing your hook size. We'll get into that more later. Let me know if this tip was helpful in the comments. So another quick way to help your tension is to use a different hook size. So real quick, for example, we have a 5mm hook, a 6mm hook, a little bit bigger, and this is like a J, I think it was like a 9 or a 10, I forgot, but it's a bigger hook, and you can see the difference between bigger, medium, and smaller, depending on the hook that you use. When I teach my crochet classes, I have students sometimes who crochet so tight that I double strand their yarn, or I give them just a bigger hook, and that helps them not to crochet so tight. Because for some beginners, a 5mm or a 5.5mm is still too small for them, even with the weight for yarn. So sometimes doubling up your yarn or going up a hook size can help you get a bigger tension. Or obviously, if you crochet too loose, you can go down a hook size or even use smaller yarn to make your tension a bit smaller, more tight, or close together. This is helpful if you're trying to make clothes or like things that, you know, the size of your stitches and the holes matter. Like amigurumi, you usually want like tighter, small single crochet stitches. People might double up their yarn, use a bigger yarn or like a smaller hook, and that'll help them have less holes in their work. Or like if you want more drape, you can also use like a bigger hook and get looser stitches and more drape that way, like for, you know, bandanas or clothing and things like that. The next thing we're going to talk about is materials and the comfort of using them, and these can hinder or help your crochet process, especially if you're a beginner. So some people like to use wooden hooks, some like to use plastic hooks, and some even like metal hooks like me. I love metal because it glides nice and easily on almost all of the yarn that I use. I don't use plastic too much because, I mean, this one's thick, but like plastic small hooks, I will break them because I guess I crochet too intensely. And skinny wooden ones, so sorry, furls, you're really pretty, but I broke the first one they sent me. I don't even use this hook because it's so I'm afraid I'll break this one too. But depending on your hook, it can either grab your yarn very well, or it can also make it easy to do it, depending on what you're doing. So for example, there is a hook by Susan Bates, or other brand companies too. I think there's 2 different hooks. If I'm wrong, I'll put on the screen. There's inline and tapered hooks. I think this one's tapered. If I'm wrong, I'll put on the screen. And you can see that the hook part is not like super sharp. But on the other hook, they have a more sharper hook part right there. And that makes it kind of, depending on your yarn, it makes it grab the yarn and split it. I put a video on my TikTok about, I might like post it or link it below about the difference. But if you're a beginner, using a more sharper hook, not like this, but like a sharper one, like this one's fine. Okay, I found it. Here is the beautiful Susan Bates hook that I found. that is what I was talking about, that can snag your yarn. If you're using like a bigger yarn, this can snag it easily. If you're a beginner using this kind of hook and wondering why your yarn keeps splitting, it might be because of this. Now, once again, this is good for different kinds of yarn, but it might not be what you're using right now. So if you see you have a hook like this and you're wondering why you keep splitting, this could be why. All right, great hook for specific types of yarn. Definitely not for this. Not good at all. Also, yarn makes a difference too. This yarn, I love it. It's line brand yarn. I think it's either Trubu or Kubu. It splits a lot, therefore making my crochet sometimes not as even, but I've been crocheting for a while, so I can use it. But for a beginner, like super splitty yarn can be very, very annoying and can make your tension vary because you're like pulling it hard to pull it through and then it's loose, or doing it like really, really tight to make sure it's perfect, so then it's too tight. So if you're a beginner, find a hook in a yarn that feels good. If you need a yarn that like does not split at all, look up like mercerized cotton. Lion Brand has some mercerized cotton. It's like a very tubular yarn, does not split. It's a great way to start if you're a beginner. It's cheaper than Wooble's yarn. So try mercerized cotton. Also get a nice basic hook. I would suggest try some metal hooks. See if it glides, if it's going to focus, see if it glides nice and easily for you. Or if it doesn't work, try different brands. This is really all about experimenting. I just suggest metal and like a nice non-splitty yarn if you're a beginner. Start off like that. Also like some bigger yarn is hard to work with sometimes, like the really thick, chunky, like fluffy yarn. That can make it difficult. Yarn that has stretch, yarn that doesn't. This all changes your tension. But find a nice basic weight 4 or 5 chunky yarn. If you don't like splitting yarn, get mercerized cotton and just start off like a nice metal hook. See if that glides nice and easy for you. But hopefully you find the materials that work best for you. And when you get better at crocheting, then you can start kind of branching out, trying different things once your tension is more secure and stable. So this next tip is something that, I swear guys, I'm not naked. This next tip is something that I mentioned earlier about your yarn, about pulling it, center pull versus outer pull. So when you're doing outer pull, you gotta tug a lot while you are crocheting. You know how it is, the yarns are rolling across your room, you're like pulling it, it's flying out the window, hitting kids in the face, you know what I mean? So sometimes, depending on the yarn, sometimes it's tight. But center pull comes out nice and easy sometimes. Y'all might fight me in the comments, but usually, if the big old yarn baby doesn't come out, nice, easy glide. Now, if you only have an outer pull, because some yarn is only outer pull, the center pull is not very good. You can get like a yarn winder if you want to be fancy and make your yarn center pull. I have a nice little yarn winder. I'll link it. I have a whole review for it as well. I bought this from Craft Destiny, and it's a great, nice hand crank yarn winder. If some yarn I want is tangled or coming out bad, I'll just wind my own cake and center pull it from what I make. And that sometimes makes the yarn easier to pull. Because if your yarn is very hard to pull, like for outer pull, you keep like pulling it, it's gonna make your tension be tight because it has like a lot more tension on the yarn because it's tight. Therefore, you're making smaller, tighter stitches. So make sure that your yarn is really easy to unwind. If not, if you don't feel like getting a yarn winder, it's the only outer pull skein, just unwind a bunch of it and then put it across your fingers and start crocheting that way. But having tight yarn to pull from is not the vibe. It will mess up your tension like every time. For my last tip, and this one I probably should have put first, it's very important. I tell all of my crochet students this. You need to relax. You need to breathe. Drop your shoulders. Stretch every now and then. Please take stretch breaks. Breathe. When you're crocheting, especially for a lot of beginners out there, even people who are crocheting for a while, even I get tense sometimes. You have to remind yourself, you don't got to go super fast all the time. Talking to myself here. Just crochet slow. You start feeling the going up. Start dropping your shoulders and relaxing. Now this takes time. We're not going to immediately relax all the time, every time. You have to be very mindful of your body, and that takes time to be aware of. I'm not always mindful. Like, I'm gonna be honest. If I'm trying to teach myself to slow down, when you're super tense, first of all, you become in pain. Your shoulders hurt, your neck hurts, your head hurts because it all connects. So just relax. Try to enjoy the hobby. Try to enjoy the process. You're gonna mess up. That's totally fine. Just relax. You don't have to go fast. You can just go really, really, really slow. Every now and then breathe. Every now and then do some stretches. You know what I mean? Do your neck, do your back, do some, I don't know, do whatever you gotta do. Watch a video, stretch. That will help you in the long run. You don't want to end up cramping your hands too much because you start crocheting tight and your hand starts hurting. I had a student, she's like, no matter what I did, my hands hurt. I was like, you're either holding the yarn wrong or in a weird way, or your hands are very sensitive and crochet is too much for them, or you're being too tight and tense. You're pulling that yarn tight and like you're holding your hook so tight it's gonna like fly away. It's not gonna fly away. I mean, it might if you throw it, but just relax. Relax. And that's my last tip for you guys, is to relax. Now, let me know which tip you found most helpful in this video. I would love your feedback in the comments below, and also post your own tips. I got a lot of awesome crocheters who watch me. Help people out, help me out. Post your own tips below about how you helped your own tension. I know a lot of it's going to be practice, which is honestly the best thing you can do. But thank you guys so much for watching. Thank you to my channel members for supporting my channel. And thank you guys for liking and commenting, subscribing, and sharing all the things. Share this with a beginner. Share this with a crochet beginner who needs to learn how to fix their tension. Hopefully this helps them. Thank y'all so much for watching. And I will see y'all in my next video. And make sure that you watch one of these videos next. All right. Have an awesome day, my crochet kings and queens. Bye. Go work on your tension. Practice, practice, practice.